So far, I've only really considered the possibility that these supposed former radical leftists have sincerely converted, but are just too egotistical and shallow to admit their own errors. There is the other scenario, which I think in many cases is far more likely. That's the scenario where the conversion is not remotely sincere, where somebody like Cenk Uygur pretends to have turned a new leaf and discovered a strange new respect for the conservative base for the one simple and straightforward reason that his traffic is tanking and the clicks are drying up and he's looking for a new shtick. He's going where the money...
Matt Walsh is back in the headlines, this time taking aim at Singer's much-hyped ideological shift. But this isn't your run-of-the-mill media feud. Walsh digs into the core of political authenticity, questioning whether high-profile conversions are genuine or just convenient rebranding. His critique peels back the gap between public rhetoric and real-world actions, spotlighting the fault lines running through today's polarized landscape. In this video, we'll dissect Walsh's case, unpack the cultural stakes, and see what this showdown says about the current state of political discourse. Let's dive.
Has been a passionate, some would say vicious, unhinged, hysterical critic of Trump and MAGA and conservatives generally for many, many years. And yet, 2 weeks ago, he tweeted that he is now somehow feeling optimistic after the guy he despised and the movement he has opposed with his whole heart and soul just won. He wrote, quote, "I've been trying to figure out why I'm more optimistic now than I was before the election, even though I was so against the guy who won. I know now. MAGA is not my mortal enemy, and neither is the extreme left. My mortal enemy is the establishment, and they have been defeated." Now, despite being a far-left commentator who has demonized conservatives for literally decades, he now says that MAGA is not his enemy. The establishment is his enemy. In other tweets and comments, he's called for unity between the two sides. He's criticized the extreme left, or as he now apparently calls them, the max left, and has assured us that if the folks on both sides can unite against the villainous establishment, we will be invincible. Last week, he appeared on the PBD podcast to explain this new approach, which he won't really admit is a new approach, but even so, here you go.
Here's what my left-wing friends don't understand. They think you guys are all MAGA, and MAGA means it's a cult, and you're never going to disagree with Trump, you're never going to disagree with each other, and that you are like their father's Republicans. But you're not their father's Republicans. And so our side, I've been trying to get them to realize that Joe Biden, Nancy Pelosi, all these folks that take the money, they're not on your side. They're on the establishment side, right? And guys, today, I think that, we could do something historic. I think that we could actually unite the left flank and the right flank. And I've got a model for how to do that, and I want to run it by you guys. Before, when I battled the right wing, it was a wall, right? I'm just like, nobody's listening to one another. They're just doing talking points. I hated it. And then MAGA looked like they were 100%. I'll be honest. I mean, in 2020, I was super pissed, and I said, look, I don't want to talk to Trump supporters. All I hear is the same thing: Trump, 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 and they never waver. So what I'm saying to the left now is, no, I'm seeing something new and different here. The MAGA base has changed. Okay, that doesn't mean they don't like Trump. It doesn't mean that they're not right wing. But there is a significant portion of the MAGA base now that is, in my opinion, right-wing populists who are actually anti-establishment, actually anti-corruption, actually anti-war. And what I'm trying to tell the left is, take the win! Take the win! We've been standing opposed here for 20 years, trying to cut the Pentagon, trying to be anti-war, getting money out of politics. If people say yes, for God's sake, that's our lost tribe. Those are our right-wing brother and sisters who are Americans, who are populists, who agree with us. Let's go fight the establishment together, because if we're united, they cannot.
Ayer's supposed ideological shift highlights a deeper question of trust when it comes to political conversions. In Walsh's view, Ayer's recent embrace of the MAGA Besa group he once openly condemned bears more resemblance to a calculated pivot than a heartfelt transformation. The absence of any candid acknowledgement of his past criticisms only fuels doubt, making the shift look less like newfound conviction and more like a bid to revive fading relevance. In today's hyperpolarized climate, such rhetorical turnarounds naturally invite suspicion. Ayer's rebranding as a bridge builder between left and right sounds noble on paper. But when his history so sharply contradicts his current message, it's no surprise that Walsh and others are questioning whether this bridge is built on solid.
Cenk says that he has a plan. In fact, he said in the interview he had a plan to unite us all. He's all about unity. And he says that the MAGA base has changed. Now it is actually anti-establishment, anti-corruption, and anti-war. But you know, there's some rather significant problems here. And the first and most obvious is that the MAGA base has always been anti-establishment, anti-corruption, and anti-war. Those have been by far the defining features of the base from day one. But Cenk pretends that this was only a recent development so that, again, he can avoid actually admitting that he was wrong. In fact, he goes further. He takes credit. He pretends that the MAGA base has come to him, that this is a left-wing win, basically. Now, the other problem, and it's a big one, is that Cenk extends this olive branch to Trump's supporters and praises them for their stand against corruption and war. But here's what he was saying about Donald Trump as recently as last October.
He's a dictator. He's a fascist. That's not hyperbole. So, and here I'll upset a bunch of people on the left. Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley are not fascists. They're terrible people for other reasons, but they've never done a coup against America. They don't use direct Nazi quotes that Trump does. The only fascist that is an actual threat to democracy is Donald J. Trump. He already tried to end this democracy once. And guys, last thing. The other day, he said, immigrants are poisoning the blood of our nation. That quote has only been used by Adolf Hitler and Donald J. Trump. So he's telling you ahead of time, I'm a Nazi. It's not like I didn't warn you. I used absurd Hitler quotes. I pulled them out of history and I said them for no reason, just to let you know I am a Nazi.
All right, by the way, that was an interview that Cenk did when he was running for president, because apparently he ran for president. Now, I follow politics for a living. I literally never heard that he ran for president. Not once did that news cross my radar. So, in other words, the run did not go very well. I think is you may be surprised to learn. So, anyway, let me see if I understand this correctly. Trump is a fascist Nazi dictator, and yet his win makes you optimistic for the country, and the supporters of the fascist Nazi dictator are not your enemies? They're your brothers and sisters? Is that it, Cenk? You're optimistic that Hitler himself was elected? And you want to unite with Hitler's supporters? You want to unite with literal, actual Nazis? So what are you, coming out as a Nazi sympathizer? Is that what's happening? Now, you might say that I'm not being very charitable. Now, after all, that was a year ago. Now, granted, I could probably find about 300 examples of Cenk calling Trump Hitler in the last 2 months, but I didn't feel like spending that long watching Cenk clips on YouTube, so this is the one we're going with. Maybe there aren't any clips more recent than that. I don't know. Maybe Cenk had this conversion experience and became a reasonable moderate right after that segment was recorded. Maybe he's been a reasonable person for a whole year. Now, that would mean he spent 53 years of life as a left-wing crackpot and 1 year as a rational human being. That's good enough, isn't it? Why should we listen to him and embrace him as a thought?
Zeroes in on Uyghur's attempt to praise Trump's supporters while still condemning Trump himself. To Walsh, this contradiction, embracing the MAGA base yet vilifying its leader, exposes a fundamental lack of ideological consistency. It's a critique that speaks to a larger challenge in political maneuvering, reconciling past attacks with a newly softened stance. For someone who has built a reputation on opposing both Trump and his movement, any pivot toward collaboration demands a delicate, strategic balance. Walsh argues that Uyghur's execution falls short of that balance, coming across less as nuanced bridge building and more as opportunistic.
Cenk was on his show condemning me for the speech that I gave at the Do No Harm rally outside the Supreme Court on Wednesday. Now, in this speech, I condemn the abuse of children and the ideology that promotes it. I say that this ideology must be entirely defeated. I use the word erase in direct reference to the ideology, not to the people, but to the ideology. And I say that about the ideology because it is an ideology that rejects basic reality and promotes and carries out the horrific medical abuse of children. Cenk didn't much like what I said, and it didn't make him feel very unified, apparently. I don't think I'm one of these brothers and sisters of his, it turns out. Watch.
So in this case, the ACLU lawyer you're talking about, I love that the brother set history there and is the first trans person to argue in front of the Supreme Court. That's a great day in America. Just another stepstone in equality, right? Now, at the same time, he was on TV the other day saying 2-year-olds know if they're trans, and I'm like, that's nuts, totally nuts. 2-year-olds don't know anything. 2-year-olds often don't know their names. How do they know if they're trans and ready for hormones? Are you nuts? So I don't agree with him on that at all. I don't know why he would say such an absurd thing, right? Okay, now let's go to the Max Right and the clip we just showed you. Far, far worse. Talking about what? They're not going to stop until trans ideology is entirely erased from the earth. Now, when you talk with that kind of language, what do you think that trans people are going to think? It sounds like you're trying to wipe them off the face of the earth. Like, don't tell me that this is just about, hey, a disagreement about puberty blockers, because we're about to have that conversation. That's not the conversation you're having. You and Marjorie Taylor Greene, when you say it's satanic, are having a conversation about how we should all hate trans people and we should wipe them out. And so if you say, oh, no, it has plausible deniability because he didn't say trans people, he said ideology. Okay, shoe on the other foot. Let's try. The left is not going to stop until Christian ideology is entirely erased from the earth. Does that sound good? You like that one? Until white ideology is wiped from the earth. Does that sound good? No, it doesn't sound good. It sounds terrible. Why does it sound terrible? Because you're obviously attacking that group, okay? And you're hiding behind one word, pretending that you don't mean to, but it's not. You're not even hiding anymore. Like Marjorie Taylor Greene is saying trans people are satanic. So, how is that not deeply, deeply hateful? So right wing, if you want us to have a reasonable conversation in this country, I'm not going to have conversations with the Max Right who are...
The ideological inconsistencies Walsh points out are especially telling in the larger conversation about how the MAGA base is portrayed, casting the movement as newly anti-establishment, anti-corruption, and anti-war overlooks the fact that these traits have been baked into its identity from the start. This kind of reframing reveals a common flaw in political commentary: project one's own ideological evolution onto others by treating long-standing values as recent discoveries. Uygur sidesteps any reckoning with his earlier misjudgments, and Walsh's critique calls out this rhetorical sleight of hand, underscoring the value of owning and learning from past mistakes rather than rewriting history to fit the moment.
There is, obviously, such a thing as trans ideology. That is an actual thing. It's the ideology that Cenk himself mildly disagrees with by saying that he wouldn't want to trans a toddler. As for erasing Christian ideology, I would strongly disagree with that statement because Christian ideology, or Christian teaching, which is what I would take that statement to mean, and by the way, if you wanted to switch it over and say trans rather than trans ideology, trans teaching, we could call it that too, okay? But when it comes to Christian teaching, Christian ideology, it's a positive force in the world. It has done immeasurable good for mankind. It has shaped Western civilization for the better. So not all ideologies are created equal. So there are things you could say about one ideology, and if you say it about that ideology, it's a fair thing to say, whereas if you said it about another one, it would not be fair. How could that be true? Well, because not all ideologies are the same. And on that point, I've got a question for you, Cenk. What if I said that white supremacist ideology should be erased? Would you object to that? Would you accuse me of calling for a genocide against white people? No, you wouldn't. In fact, you would wholeheartedly agree. And that's because you understand the distinction between people and ideologies. You understand that, obviously, your fundamental goal when you oppose an ideology is for it to eventually no longer exist. If you think an ideology is evil, if you think it does nothing but harm, if you think it hurts people, then you want it to be gone, to no longer exist, to be erased. Not by killing the people who profess the ideology, which would be not only wrong, but also, as history shows, a very ineffective way of actually erasing an ideology anyway. Instead, you want to rid the world of it by exposing it and defeating it and discrediting the ideas that it espouses. This is a distinction that I know you're smart enough to understand. But you pretend you don't in this case because you actually agree with trans ideology. That's the problem. You don't have a problem with the way I oppose it, but rather with the fact that I do. Which I know because you start by fundamentally agreeing with the ideology when you affirm the manhood of somebody who is 100% female.
Discussion of transgender ideology serves as a microcosm of today's wider cultural battles. His criticism of Uygur's response to his speech at the Supreme Court's Do No Harm rally hinges on a key distinction: opposing an ideology versus attacking individuals. Walsh maintains that his stance stems from concerns about the ideology's impact on children and societal norms, not from animosity toward transgender people themselves. Ayer's portrayal of his rhetoric as hateful reflects a broader pattern in political discourse, where ideological critiques are frequently conflated with personal attacks. By stressing this difference, Walsh underscores the need for clarity and precision when navigating such highly charged debates.
And have humility and be willing to take a back seat. And yet, out of all the janks in the world, out of all the radical leftists who have been reborn either as moderates or conservatives or whatever they're calling themselves now, almost none of them fall into the category I just described. Almost none of them have ever shown any remorse or any humility. Almost none of them have apologized to any of the people who they lied about and defamed and whose reputations they tried to destroy. Almost none of them have even been willing to admit that they were wrong. Instead, they claim that they've remained consistent while the left abandoned them. And this is, as I said, at the absolute most, only partially true. There is always at least another part, the part where, in fact, they have drastically changed their tune on a number of serious issues, but they won't admit it. At the very least, these are people who ignored and probably scoffed at and demeaned the conservatives who told them that the left was on a slippery slope into madness. They didn't listen. So at the very least, they were wrong about that. But they won't admit that either. And yet they show up and they have all their ideas and we're supposed to listen to them. And they even have the gumption to turn around to conservatives who have been in this movement forever and try to lecture them and say, oh, no, I'll tell you how to really argue on these issues. What the hell do you know? You've been wrong about everything. You just started being sort of right about a few things 10 seconds ago. Maybe have some humility and shut up and listen for a few. You haven't listened at all your entire life. Maybe you should be listening now. So what all this tells us, at best, is that these people still have all of the same arrogance and ignorance that made them radical leftists in the first place. It also tells us that these are not credible voices we should be listening to or taking seriously. Not everybody is a thought leader. Okay, not everyone has a platform with a large audience. In fact, most people don't. And if you've been wrong about everything and are still too arrogant to even admit it, even while you try to cozy up to the people you've demonized for years, then you should certainly be in the non-thought leader cat crowd. Okay, especially considering that about 99% of the people who are not thought leaders on our side are vastly more equipped for the role than you are. But of course, this is all just the best case scenario. So far I've only really considered the possibility that these supposed former radical leftists have sincerely converted, but are just too egotistical and shallow to admit their own errors. There is the other scenario, which I think in many cases is far more likely. That's the scenario where the conversion is not remotely sincere, where somebody like Cenk Uygur pretends to have turned a new leaf and discovered a strange new respect for the conservative base for the one simple and straightforward reason that his traffic is tanking and the clicks are drying up and he's looking for a new shtick. He's going where the money and the audience are. Now, I can't see inside the souls of any of these people or read their minds, but I can read between the lines. And when I look there, I see the word grifter in giant bold.
Critique of ideological converts raises pointed questions about accountability and humility. He contends that figures like Uygur, who have spent years denouncing conservative values, must show genuine remorse and a willingness to listen before earning acceptance within the conservative movement. This tension between welcoming growth and safeguarding authenticity is a recurring theme in political circles. While embracing converts can broaden a movement's reach, it also risks watering down its core principles. For Walsh, accountability is non-negotiable. He frames Uygur's shift not as an awakening, but as a calculated bid to regain relevance, a move that, in his view, smacks of grifting. The label is provocative, but it taps into a broader cynicism in modern politics, where authenticity is often eclipsed by the suspicion of self-interest, his analysis challenges audiences to look past the headlines and ask whether high-profile conversions stem from conviction or convenience. In Walsh's eyes, sincerity and consistency aren't just ideals, they're prerequisites for